The man observed people riding horses swiftly toward him. He informed the two girls that the riders were approaching. One lady responded that she understood his warning. The other said that she would care for the young miss. The little girl grabbed the lady's pant leg. She referred to the gentleman as her father and wished him luck. The first lady screamed loudly to thrash them. He assured her he would obey any order she gave. The guy used the ability to compress the earth itself. A rider shrieked in terror because a man had just appeared before him out of nowhere. He thrust his spear at him. Calmly, the Manus the Kai sword, a light step technique. He hit him on the head, rendering him unconscious. An armored soldier saw him, called him the Sword Saint. The scene changed to current-day Japan. The guy was walking down the street of a noisy city. He looked at his phone and said that the end of next week and the year would end. What a bore. A message came to him. The guy asked in surprise what it was. The message asked him that he wanted to go to another world. He didn't notice and started crossing the road at a red light. Someone shouted for him to stop. It's dangerous there. The guy looked at the man who was shouting at him in surprise. He never managed to escape. He was hit by a truck. He lay on the ground and listened to the screams. People were saying loudly that there was an accident. A high school student was hit by a truck. Someone called an ambulance. The guy closed his eyes. A man stood over him and looked at him carefully. The guy jumped up and shouted loudly that he was dead. The man replied that yes, it is. The guy started waving his arms, but they were intact. He looked at the man and said that he remembered how there was a truck in front of him. The man smiled broadly. The guy loudly asked who he was and where he was now. He turned his head and saw the city that was below. The guy shouted loudly that there was a city there and he was now on a cloud. The man hit him with a cane and said he was too noisy. If you move a lot, you'll fall off. The guy shouted loudly that he would not beat him with a stick. The man looked at him and said that young people are so rude now. He asked him that he was aware that God was standing in front of him. The guy replied without emotion that it was good. The man asked what his reaction was. The guy replied that his grandmother's last wish was never to believe anyone who says he is God. The man thought about it and said that for sure there was such a thing. As soon as he told her, he said that he was an old deceiver. The guy wondered how his grandma could answer like that. The guy said in amazement that for sure grandma decided that she was arguing nonsense if she was in front of God. He's definitely a god. The guy asked that he met him by mistake. God sat down on a chair and replied that no, now they have to get back to the main thing. He thought a little and said that so, by his mistake. The god fell silent and the guy sighed in surprise. The man said his name was Sansui. The guy replied that, as it were, yes. God awkwardly said that, in general, his name does not look like the name of a teenager and he made the mistake of extinguishing the candle of his life. Sansui angrily said that it was time for him to retire. God said he was here forever. The guy replied irritably that he was happy, that he was very lucky. The man stopped talking and looked at the guy. After a short pause, God awkwardly said that because of his mistake, he was sending him to another world. Sansui said in amazement that he was being sent to another world. He joyfully jumped on the spot and shouted that the excellent development of the end of his life. God replied that it was good, he understood him. The man opened a drawer with paper and ink. God said he would give him strength so he wouldn't die. He can choose anyone. Sansui happily asked that he could choose any power he wanted. God took the paper in his hands and confidently replied that yes, he only needed to say. Sansui shouted joyfully that he wanted to be the strongest man on earth. God told him to stop. He asked Sansui that he wasn't ashamed to say such a thing at all. The guy happily replied that it was true. He had dreamed about it since childhood. God awkwardly said that it was good. He wrote the words on the paper and spoke to Sansui to take this letter. One day he will meet someone, he has to give it to him. God added that this man would teach him. The guy sighed in surprise. God replied that he needed to work to become strong. The main thing is that he does not forget to give this letter. It was time for him to go. God kicked the cloud and it split into two parts. Sansui shouted loudly for him to wait. God pushed him and the guy started flying away. He screamed loudly and God just waved goodbye to him. The guy found himself in the forest. He said that he was sent to this forest and did not give any instructions. Sansui remembered the words of God so that he would not forget to give this letter. The guy said that the story of the letter is the main thing of all that he said. He heard a noise and asked in fear what it was. Someone is here now. There was a guy standing on a tree branch and he said yes. He feels anxious, but how lovely it is to meet someone from another world. Sansui looked at him in surprise and thought how he was standing on such a tiny twig. The guy jumped off the branch and approached Sanusi. He examined it carefully and said that it did not seem dangerous. The guy asked that he was looking for a village in this forest. Sansui stared at him in shock. The guy said that if his assumption is correct, then it is 7 minutes to walk to it. Sansui asked in surprise what his teacher was. The guy asked with interest what he meant. Sansui thought that his teacher was this guy. He needed to give the letter to him. He must do as God said. Sansui awkwardly handed him the letter and told him to take it and read it. The guy asked what it was, a presentation letter. He unfolded the letter and began to read it carefully. He made a sad face and asked if he wanted to be the strongest in the world if he had problems with his head. God wants him to shake this nonsense about the strongest out of him. Sansui awkwardly thought that he was very ashamed. The guy asked him what he knew and who Kensei was. Sansui looked at him with interest. The guy said that apparently not. He sighed and said that fine, he would make him his disciple. Sansui awkwardly replied that thank you so much. The guy said with a sneer that most likely in 500 years he will be able to become the strongest man on earth. Sansui shouted in shock that he needed 500 years, but he would already die by that time. It was impossible to become the strongest somehow faster. The guy looked at him in surprise. He said there was no quick way to get stronger. He cannot worry about his life as long as he studies with him. 500 years will fly by unnoticed. Sansui said with tears in his eyes that he only wanted a girl and authority, that's all. The guy happily said that he has been studying for 1,000 of years and still has not finished his studies. There is no end to his studies. The guy was jumping on the branches when suddenly he saw an old house. He jumped onto the roof, but the building couldn't stand it. He went inside and saw a wooden sword. A breathless Sansui came running to him, who called him a master. He tried to catch his breath after a long run through the woods. The guy put the sword on his shoulder and told him with a smile that he had caught up with him after all. Sansui, panting loudly, asked how he jumps on the ends of the branches. The guy scratched his chin and replied that he was doing this with the help of a technique that allows you to make the body lighter. The master laughed and added with a smile that it wouldn't be long before he could use it too. Sansui said wearily that he thought it would definitely be a while. The guy handed him and told him to take it. Sansui asked if it was a wooden sword. The master replied that his training would be simple. Every day when the sun rises, he will take the sword and wave it. The guy added that he would wave until the sun went down and there would be no end to his swings without his instructions. Sansui looked at the sword in surprise and said that he had to wave it endlessly. The master asked with a smile what they were starting. He took a stance with his wooden sword and said that only one quality was important, his determination to continue training. The guy added that he should remember this and one day he will become the strongest. Sansui thought that this was how his 500-year-long training began. He went on to say that he soon realized how difficult life is in this world. He started daily training with his Suiboku master. The first years were harsh. He started sword strikes from sunrise and it lasted until night, then went to bed to meet the dawn and start training again. At first, he was often hungry. Soon, after a while, the feeling of hunger began to settle that before his master, it seems that sages like him only have enough haste to continue living. They don't need worldly food. With thoughts that he has no other choice, he continued his training day after day, learning all the new things that the master taught him. He didn't even notice how his old school uniform became a Kinagashi master. Many years seemed to have flown by instantly. Even after 500 years, the gap between him and the master has not become smaller at all. While he was aware of his lack of preparation, intruders made their way into the forest. Sansui shouted to the master that someone was there. Two guys quickly jumped from branch to branch. Savok said anxiously that this was the first time someone had entered this forest since his arrival. They ran to the clearing and saw how the wolves were eating him. It was a girl who covered the child with her back. Saiboka said that he saw that they were late. The guys jumped down into the clearing and the wolves scattered in different directions. Sansui took the little baby in his arms. The guy was surprised and told the master that fate was something else, but the child survived. Saiboka said wearily that, on the contrary, it was a big problem for them. He asked the guy to listen to him carefully and why not raise him. Sansui sighed in surprise and looked at the child who was sleeping in his arms. The kid heard someone talking and opened his eyes. Sansui hesitantly said that there was no immortal Kai power coming from him. The master said that he was right. Saiboka said that he feels the magic coming from the child, so it does not seem impossible for him to become a sage, but it is not necessary. He can bring him up in the human world. The child grabbed Sansui's finger. The guy said that the master was right. Saiboka said that his disciple Sansui, he goes to the human world and will gain experience there as a sage and as a swordsman. The master added that he considered it part of the training. He is sure that 500 years of training here and the techniques he taught him have made him even stronger. Saiboka confidently said that he should raise the child as his own. Sansui replied that yes, he understands. The master smiled broadly and said that he was leaving everything to him, his disciple. He's so proud of him. Sansui looked at the child and smiled gently. Saiboku looked at him and said that he was entrusted with the life Until he finds an acceptable home and raises the child properly, he is not allowed to return here. The master smiled broadly and added that he should not worry. He stopped in front of a beautiful view and told the child that this was the beginning of their life together. Sansui began to reflect that, come to think of it, he was surprised at how much power he had gained here, wondering what the human world could give him. He confidently said that first he had to find a job so that the child would have something to eat. Sansui quickly ran across the field with the child, who suddenly began to cry loudly. He stopped and looked at the child in surprise. The guy anxiously asked what happened.